Hey everyone and welcome, it's Smarty Pants Chess here, and today I want to look at the first game in a series of games in the Fischer-Cardoso match. So this was a match played between Bobby Fischer, who was 14 years old at the time, against a prodigy also called Rodolfo Cardoso, who was a Filipino champion. So this was a match of two great prodigies at the time, and there's actually a really great picture of the two playing together where the first move is being made, and actually a president of Pepsi Cola was there who actually sponsored this event. So at the time they were both very young players, so there are a few mistakes in their games, but this was a tremendous match and I just want to go into it. So let's just get straight into it. This is the first game of the match of 8 games. Cardoso is playing with the white pieces and Fischer is playing with the black pieces. Cardoso begins with 1e4, Fischer plays c5, White plays knight to f3, there's d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes, Fischer plays knight to f6, attacking the e4 pawn, and white plays knight to c3, and then there's a6. So we're into a Najdorf, where black's played a6 to support this b5 square, stopping any knights or bishops jumping into it, and Cardoso now played bishop g5, Fischer plays e6. Cardoso goes in for quite an aggressive line with f4, and prepares the move e5. Fischer plays bishop e7, so stops this pin from the bishop on g5. Cardoso plays queen f3, and Fischer plays h6, hitting this bishop on g5. So white's got a decision to make. They can take the knight on f6 or retreat it to h4. In this case, white plays bishop h4, and Fischer now plays the hyper-aggressive g5. And interestingly, this is what's known as the Argentine or Goteborg variation. It was first played in round 14 of 1955 Goteborg International, simultaneously by 3 Argentinian players, Panno, Pilnik and Najdorf, who were facing the Soviet grandmasters Geller, Spassky and Keres. And the games actually proceeded the same way that Fischer played this, with f takes g5 and knight f to d7. And black's plan is to play knight c6 and support a knight on e5. However, the white players thought they'd come up with a good novelty here with knight takes e6. And if f takes e6, they would play queen h5, king f8 and then just bishop b5. And white's going to play rook f1 and it looks tremendous for white. It looks like they've got a great attack. However, in 1958, a year after this Cardoso game was played, Fischer actually found the move rook h7, which actually saves black. Because after queen g6, rook f7, queen takes and then king g8, queen g6, black can just play rook g7, and even after queen takes e6, black's safe with king h8, and if white takes the knight, there's knight takes, castles and knight to e5. And here actually black is considered better, and this was actually a game between Goteborg and Fischer, and it ended in a draw, but actually black is considered better here because they're actually a piece up. I mean, white's got 4 pawns for compensation, so it's not exactly easy, but the computers recommend that black is winning this. So going back to this Cardoso-Fischer match, instead of knight takes e6 with his novelty, white just castled queenside here. A reasonable safety move. Fischer jumped in with knight to e5, attacking the queen on f3, and the queen retreated back to e2, and Fischer recaptured his pawn on g5, and white retreated their bishop back. And Fischer stuck with a plan. He played knight to d7, supporting the knight on e5. White played queen to e1, and I believe this is just to try and get the bishop out, maybe even support the bishop on g3. But Fischer just struck now with b5, and his plan is quite simple. It's just to target this white king. Fischer's preparing b4 or knight to c4, and white's got a lot of problems on their hands. To stop the advance of this b4 pawn, white played a3. And Fischer just continued with his hyper-development with bishop to b7. So fianchettoing his bishop, targeting this e4 pawn, and white played knight to f3. So maybe trying to trade off knights and bishop to get rid of this knight on e5. But first Fischer now played queen to c7, so getting his queen into the attack. And white played queen to d2. So at the moment actually white's got very little problems as well. They've got some decent moves. But saying that though, I think queen d2 was weak. I think they should have just taken this knight on e5. I think after d takes, again white's in a nice position. But in the game after queen to d2, I believe now black could play a nice move, knight to c5, attacking this pawn on e4. And if queen e2 to support it, then black can play knight to g6. And I was struggling for moves here for white. I'm not really sure where white can go. For instance, let's say king b1, which looks reasonably nice, safety. Black can just pile on more pressure though with rook c8. And again, I'm struggling for moves for white here. I looked at queen to e1, but then just comes knight takes e4, knight takes e4, and queen takes c2. So that's just a blunder. I also looked at king to a1, but still, black's crashing in with moves like queen a5, preparing b4 ideas. So I'm stumped at what to do as white here. I think white's got a few problems. So in the game, Fischer didn't play knight c5, he played knight takes f3, taking the knight off, and g takes f3, and now played knight to e5, so just putting another knight back on that annoying square for white. I think Cardoso had enough of this knight on e5, so they took it, bishop takes was played, black recaptured, and to stop b4 ideas, white played knight to a2, so the knight just stops b4 because he'll take it. And Fischer now piled on more pressure with rook to d8, so attacks the queen. And actually I think white's move was quite nice. Bishop d3 developing their bishop, blocking the rook. And Fischer actually played queen to b6. So Fischer's piling on more pressure, maybe playing b4 or a5. And actually his idea for Fischer now is just to keep his king safe. So white gets their king safe with king b1. And Fischer decides to get his king safe with f6. So f6 supports the e5 and g5 pawn. And Fischer wants to put his king to safety on king f7 where it's relatively safe. White played queen to g2, so maybe trying to scare black into not playing king f7, but also get off the d file from this rook, which makes total sense. But Fischer plays king f7, again the king is really safe here, and white just goes queen e2, so it doesn't look like white's got a really solid plan, just moving their queen back and forth. But Fischer does have a plan. He plays bishop c6, protects his b5 pawn so he can play a5 next move, and get on with his attack. So Cardoso tries to be more defensive, he plays c3, Fischer plays a5 though, and b4 is coming. There's not really much white can do to stop it. If b4, then black will just take it, and if knight takes, play rook a8, and they're preparing to play rook takes a3. If king to b2 to protect the pawn, black still has queen c5, and actually they could have a rook sacrifice on here. For instance, if, let's just say white plays this, then I'm sure black can just take this pawn. And if king takes his, queen takes c3. And we can also get the other rook into the attack. So after queen c5, I think rook a1's the best move. But even so, black can now just switch to play. Then play rook h3. If queen g2, it's rook a h8. Switching the play for black, switching it onto the h file. And black looks reasonably comfortable here with total control of the position. For instance, I think black can just play, let's say, queen e3 next move and try and win this f-pawn. So after a5, white played bishop c2, trying to trade rooks. Fischer plays b4, so crashing in, and pretty much white's got to take this pawn off, otherwise there'll be b takes a3 and the b pawn is pinned. Also actually black's threatening to push this pawn up to b3 and fork the knight and bishop, so white has to take this off. So white plays a takes b4. Fischer recaptures, so white plays bishop to b3 to set up a little trap, because if black now plays b takes c3, thinking that is just winning for black, white's got the sneaky bishop takes e6 with check. The point is, if the king takes this, then white can go queen c4 check, and that's mate unless black blocks it, so bishop d5, and then just e takes d5, winning their piece back. And if king f7, there's d6 with check, and after king to g7, white can calmly play knight takes c3, and this is decent for white now. They've got a good game. Just a quick note that white can't take this bishop off because then queen takes b2 is checkmate, so that's why knight takes c3 is the best move. So in the game after bishop to b3, black played bishop b5, attacking the queen. White's got a decision to make here. I think they played the best move in the game, but bishop c4 was possible, but I think then after bishop takes, queen takes c4 and b takes c3, white can play queen takes c3, but then black's just now looks a lot better. They've got the open file on this b1 king. For instance, there's rook c8 attacking the queen. If the queen goes to d2, there's a rook to b8, rook to c1, rook b7, rook c2 to protect everything, and just rook a8. And black can even play rook a3 at some point and rook to b3. So they've got a very nice position. Even bishop a3 could come in as well because this b pawn is pinned by this queen. I would hate to play white here. So I think white played the best move, which was c4, attacking the bishop. And now Fischer played bishop to c6 to move it away. White captured on d8, rook takes d8 was played, and finally white has some sort of counterplay with h4. And Fischer has to be relatively careful here, because if you take this pawn off and rook takes, white's actually got a very even game all of a sudden. And even if like queen g1, there's just knight c1 and white's doing fine. So Fischer played actually the best move. He played g4. The point is now white takes this pawn on g4, but then comes Fischer crashing in with a nice tactic, rook d2 attacking the queen. And the queen is pretty much forced to take this rook off, because if queen e1, there'll be queen d4, threatening mate on b2, and if queen c1, there's bishop takes e4, and a fork against the king and rook. So queen takes rook is forced, bishop takes e4 was played with check, forking the king and rook, bishop c2, and Fischer wins his rook back. Bishop takes h1. And now here actually I think Cardoso did miss a draw. I think he should just play knight c1, because if black goes queen to g1, you've got h5. And if the queen takes g4, there's bishop g6, king g7 and queen d7. And after a series of more tactics like bishop e4 check, king a1, bishop takes, h takes and queen takes c4. White can play queen takes e7. And after king takes g6, white should have a draw here with perpetual checks with queen e8, king to g5 and queen g8, king f5 and like queen h7 check. The point is if the king ever goes to f4, let's say, there's queen h4 check and we'll pick up the queen and move later. So after let's say king g5 here, white can just continue with the checks and that should be a draw. So ideas like knight c1 were certainly on the table here, but Cardoso miscalculated. He played queen h6 first. Maybe he thought he had a perpetual here. It looks very promising indeed, but he must have missed this move queen g1 from Fischer with check, because after knight c1 Fischer has queen takes g4 and there should be no more perpetual checks here. He tries with queen h7 but the queen can now block it. He tries again but the king just goes to f8 and there's suddenly no more checks. But white's quite inventive. He plays bishop a4, threatening mate with the queen, but Fischer sees a nice tactic again, just check, the king moves and he can block the queen with bishop to g6. The queen goes back to d1 and Fischer plays queen h6, attacks the h-pawn and the knight at the same time. White protects both of them with the queen to e1, but now queen f4 attacks the c4 pawn. White defends their pawn, but now Fischer threatens mates on b1 with the queen to e4, forcing the trade of queens. So there's a trade of queens, and Cardoso played bishop to d1. But now black's just got a load of passed pawns in this centre now. He can push this f-pawn and push these two e-pawns up the board. I mean, granted white has two passed pawns as well, but now black also has the two bishops, which should be able to subdue both. For instance, this bishop is covering this c5 square, and there's no way to push this pawn up, and the king will get in time to stop this h-pawn. So Fischer plays f5, king a2 was played, and Fischer plays f4, and these pawns are storming up the board really fast. White plays knight to e2, Fischer plays bishop d3, attacks the pawn and the knight, king b3 protects the pawn, but Fischer plays f3 which hits the knight, which he's forced to move to g3, and now he plays f2. So preparing ideas like f1 and getting a queen. I mean, this bishop is already eyeing up this h-pawn as well, so this knight might have to move. White plays bishop c2. I think this was a mistake because now black just gets the queen. Knight takes the queen, bishop takes, bishop e4, and this is all she wrote. After king g7, white resigned the game, simply because there's no way to stop these two bishops. The bishop's attacking this h-pawn, it's also protecting this b4 pawn, and stops c5. Eventually the king's just going to go walkies and take this pawn off, and there's no way to stop these e-pawns because they can just trade bishops. An easy one-end game, to be honest. So Fischer wins the first game of the series against Cardoso. I thought this was a very nicely played start to the match. Again, Fischer is only 14 years old against a 19-year-old. So it's very interesting to see how he played early on in his career. And already we can see that there's definitely signs that he's a champion in the making. Anyway, hope you enjoyed my analysis of this game. I hope to bring you the rest of the games very soon. If you enjoy my content, please drop a like, comment or subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.